Hey everyone tuning in, grab a seat and maybe a comforting drink, because what I'm about to share isn't your run-of-the-mill campfire tale. This story is mine, a slice of my life I never thought I'd be sharing. But here we are, and if my experience can serve as a warning, maybe it's worth telling after all. My adventure, or should I say misadventure, started with what was supposed to be a refreshing getaway. I was coming off the back of a rough few months. You know how it is? Life throws curveballs. Work was a mess and my personal life? Let's just say it was complicated. That's the polite term, right? So I decided I needed a break from it all. A change of scenery, a chance to clear my head. And what better place than Tokyo? A city vibrant with life, culture, and an energy that I hoped would reboot my worn-out soul. After hours of scrolling through listings, I stumbled upon this quaint little cabin on the outskirts of Tokyo. It looked like something out of a storybook, secluded but not too remote, surrounded by woods with a charm that the city's neon lights couldn't offer. The price was right, the pictures were inviting, and before I knew it, my finger clicked, book now. It was impulsive, sure, but sometimes that's just what you need. The journey there was a blur of airports, crowded planes, and a whirlwind of taxi rides. By the time the Tokyo skyline faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by the serene outskirts, I could feel the weight of the past few months starting to lift, just a bit. The cabin was exactly as advertised. Rustic, cozy, nestled in a quiet part of the woods. The kind of place you'd read about in a novel, where characters find themselves or hide away from the world. I remember stepping out of the taxi, the air fresh with the scent of pine and earth after recent rain. It was quiet, the kind of quiet you don't get in the city, where silence is filled with the distant hum of life. Here, it was different. Here, the silence was almost too heavy, like it was waiting to be broken. Dragging my suitcase up the steps, I noticed the first signs of neglect. The wood was worn, the paint peeling in places, but it added to the charm, I thought. The key, left under the mat by the owner, turned in the lock with a creak that echoed a welcome or a warning. I wasn't sure which. Stepping inside, the cabin felt immediately like a refuge from the outside world. But as I unpacked, a subtle unease began to creep in. You know that feeling you get, like when you're sure you're being watched, but there's no one there. It was like that. A prickle at the back of my neck, a whisper in the silence of the cabin. I told myself it was just the solitude, the shift from bustling city life to the stillness of nature. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't completely alone. Exhausted from the travel and the eerie feelings, I decided to turn in early, convinced that a good night's sleep was all I needed. But as I lay in bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the woods, that unsettling feeling lingered. Little did I know that was just the beginning. The next day dawned, bright and clear, with the sun casting a warm, inviting glow over everything. I woke up feeling slightly better, attributing the previous night's eerie sensations to the fatigue of travel and the adjustment to a new place. Today's a new day, I told myself, determined to make the most out of my Tokyo adventure. I had a list of places to see, foods to try, and experiences to soak in. The city did not disappoint. From the ancient temples standing stoic amid the rush of the modern world to the bustling markets, every moment was a barrage of sights, sounds, and smells that captivated my senses and momentarily washed away the remnants of my unease. As I wandered through the vibrant streets, diving into the heart of Tokyo's rich history and culture, I couldn't help but feel rejuvenated. The fascinating blend of tradition and innovation, the courteousness of the people, and the sheer energy of the city were intoxicating. I allowed myself to be swept away by the tide of locals and tourists, each absorbed in their own worlds, yet part of the city's grand, bustling symphony. But as the day wore on and the sky shifted from the clear azure to the warm hues of dusk, a small part of my mind began to drift back to the cabin. There was an unshakable contrast between the life pulsating through the city's veins and the silent solitude waiting for me. Nevertheless, I shrugged off the lingering dread. It's just a cabin, I thought, trying to convince myself. There's nothing to be afraid of. With night approaching, I decided to head back, my feet aching but my heart filled with the day's adventures. The return journey was a quiet one, the taxi's wheels crunching softly on the gravel road leading up to the cabin. That's when I noticed it, the lights. They were on. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I was certain I had turned them off. Hadn't I? Doubt gnawed at me, but then so did the rational part of my brain, chalking it up to forgetfulness, or maybe even the owner checking in after I'd left. Trying to shake off the unease, I thanked the taxi driver and made my way inside. The warmth from the lights did little to dispel the growing sense of dread. Something felt different, like the air had shifted, become heavier. With each step, the familiar sensation of being watched returned, more pronounced than before. It was then, as I stood there trying to collect my thoughts, that the power flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls before settling once more into stillness. I forced a laugh, trying to break the tension that clung to the air like a damp cloth. Great, now I'm getting scared of the dark, I muttered to myself, heading upstairs to change and unwind. But that's when I saw it. Not immediately, mind you, but as a gradual realization that something was amiss, a splash of color that didn't belong. There in the corner of the room sat a doll. It was old, the kind you'd find buried in a grandmother's attic, with faded clothes and a porcelain face cracked with time. Its eyes, glassy and unblinking, seemed to fixate on nothing and everything all at once. I recoiled, a mix of confusion and fear knotting in my stomach. How did this get here? I wondered, my mind racing. The cabin had been empty when I arrived, of that I was sure. Compelled by a mix of curiosity and an unspoken dread, I approached cautiously as if the doll might spring to life at any moment. That's when I noticed the guest book, lying open beside it. My breath caught as I read the most recent entry, a child's scrawl filled with innocent joy, talking about the wonderful time had with her best friend in the cabin. The doll. The realization hit me like a wave. This wasn't just some forgotten toy, it was cherished, loved, and there was a phone number written in the same childish hand. Maybe I should return it, I thought, trying to shake off the unease that clung to the doll like an unseen aura. Yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll call them tomorrow. I decided, convincing myself that this simple act of kindness would somehow set things right, dispel the growing shadows that seemed to creep around the edges of my vision. But oh, how wrong I was. That night's sleep was a stranger. Every creak and whisper of the wind became a sinister murmur, every shadow a lurking figure. The doll, with its silent, accusing gaze, became the sentinel of my nightmares. An unwelcome companion in the darkness. Morning couldn't come soon enough. After a restless night filled with twisting shadows and the ever-present gaze of the doll, dawn was a relief, a sliver of sanity as sunlight filtered through the curtains. Despite the sleepless hours, my resolve was set. Return the doll, end this eerie chapter, and perhaps find some peace. With the family's contact details clutched in my hand, I dialed the number, my other hand unconsciously avoiding the doll's silent, unsettling watch. The phone call was surreal. A mix of relief and joy emanated from the other end as the little girl's mother expressed her gratitude. They had been looking for the doll, it seemed, ever since they left the cabin. The girl, their daughter, was especially attached to it, and her heartbreak had been tangible. Arrangements were made swiftly, too swiftly in hindsight, for them to collect their lost treasure. It should have ended there. A good deed done. A strange episode closed. But life, I've learned, rarely follows the script we write. Their visit was brief, a whirlwind of gratitude and childlike joy as the little girl reclaimed her beloved doll. Her innocent attachment to the toy, her laughter as she hugged it close, it should have dispelled all the darkness, all the lingering doubts. Yet as they drove away, a chill lingered, an unspoken shadow that no amount of sunlight could dispel. With the doll gone, I expected relief, a return to normalcy. But the cabin felt emptier, quieter, as if the departure of the doll had left a void, a silent echo of unease. Shaking off the feeling, I decided to leave early, to return to my life in Tokyo, to immerse myself in the mundane and forget about dolls and eerie presences. Home was supposed to be my sanctuary, a place free from the peculiar dread that had cloaked the cabin. Yet, as I settled back into my routine, a disquieting realization crept up on me. The sensation of being watched, of not being alone, had followed me. It was subtle at first, easy to dismiss as lingering nerves or an overactive imagination. But nights grew longer, shadows deeper, and the cold sense of another presence became a constant companion. The turning point came in a moment so ordinary it was almost absurd. Scrolling through social media, a break from the unease that had started to color my days, I stumbled upon a post from the local community group. Missing, the same family that had just visited the cabin to retrieve their doll. The details were sparse, but the implication clear. They had disappeared, vanished without a trace, and no one knew where they had gone. Panic is a strange sensation. It creeps up slowly, then overwhelms you all at once. The connection was impossible, irrational, yet there it was, staring me in the face. Had the doll, their cherished possession, been a harbinger of something darker, something beyond understanding? My mind raced, seeking rational explanations where none seemed to fit. The decision to reach out, to try and uncover more, was made with a trembling hand and a heavy heart. But each inquiry, each attempt to understand, only deepened the mystery, leaving me more isolated, more afraid. It was a solitude of the soul, a realization that some truths might lie beyond the veil of the known, the safe. As days blurred into nights, the oppressive sense of dread grew. It was no longer confined to the shadows of the night. It seeped into daylight hours, a constant, unyielding pressure. My home, once a haven, now felt like a trap, a place where unseen eyes followed my every move, where whispers of the past echoed through empty rooms. In desperation, I turned inward, questioning my own senses, my sanity. The world around me seemed to shift, subtle and insidious, a reality untethered from the familiar. The haunting, whatever it was, had woven itself into the very fabric of my existence, leaving me questioning what was real and what was a figment of a fraying mind. But it was the return of the doll, the impossible, incomprehensible return, that shattered the fragile veneer of normalcy I had clung to. There it was, one evening, as twilight bled into night, sitting as though it had never left, its glassy eyes reflecting the last dying light. How it came back, why it came back, these were questions I could no longer answer. The link between the doll and the family, between their fate and my own, was a chain of whispers and shadows, a puzzle whose pieces were lost in the dark corners of fear and the unknown. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. The story, my story, had taken a turn into realms I never wished. At this point, folks, you might think I'd seen enough to last a lifetime, but the universe wasn't done with me yet. The return of the doll to my home, after I was so certain it had left my life for good, sent a wave of cold dread through my core. I stared at it, sitting there on my living room table, as if mocking me, with its silent, painted smile. The air around me felt heavy, charged with an unspoken menace. I wanted to throw it out, to destroy it even, but something held me back. Was it fear, curiosity, or perhaps the deep, sinking realization that whatever was happening was beyond my control? Instead, I did what any desperate person would do. I sought help. I reached out to paranormal investigators, a group I found after hours of frantic searching online. Each click a plea for a return to normalcy. They were understanding, even sympathetic. But behind their professional assurances, I detected a note of skepticism. After all, to the outside world, I was just another city dweller, spooked by an old doll. But when they arrived, everything changed. Their equipment, strange and foreign, filled my small living room, casting eerie shadows against the walls. They moved with a purpose, their earlier skepticism fading as the atmosphere within the house made itself known. It wasn't long before their devices began to react, to whine and crackle in the presence of the doll, validating my fears with cold, hard evidence. The lead investigator, a woman with eyes as sharp as her intellect, explained their findings with a calmness that belied the situation's gravity. There was an energy, she said, an unmistakable presence linked to the doll. It was as if, through the toy, something was reaching out, anchoring itself to our world, to my home. The hours they spent were a blur of activity and whispered conversations. I watched, a silent observer in my own home, as they performed their rituals, their attempts to sever the connection between the doll and whatever malevolence it harbored. But as the night wore on, it became increasingly clear that this was no ordinary haunting, no simple spirit to be banished with words and salt. Their final words to me were a mix of apologies and warnings. The doll, they said, was a vessel, but not one easily emptied. They could take it, contain it, but there were no guarantees. The truth hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't something that could be solved with a quick fix, no matter how much I wished it could be. With heavy hearts, they packed their equipment, the doll now secured in a box that seemed too small, too fragile to contain the darkness it harbored. They promised to do what they could. But as their vehicle disappeared into the night, a part of me knew that this was far from over. The following days were a testament to that sinking feeling. The investigator's departure brought no relief, only a deepening silence, a void where the doll had once been. But it was the absence of activity, the eerie calm, that unsettled me most. The sense of being watched had intensified, a constant pressure at the back of my mind, a whisper in the darkness that refused to be silenced. Sleep became an elusive, tortured affair, filled with half-seen nightmares and the ever-present sensation of unseen eyes upon me. My home, once a place of refuge, had become a prison of fear and shadows, each corner a hiding place for the unseen. I jumped at every sound, saw movement in every shadow, a mind frayed by the constant strain of unseen terror. In my search for answers, for any shred of understanding, I scoured the internet, delving into forums and articles, each one a deep dive into the paranormal, into the dark corners of human experience. But knowledge is a double-edged sword, and with each tale of haunted objects and vengeful spirits, the walls of my reality seemed to thin, blurring the lines between the possible and the impossible. It was in this state of desperation, of creeping madness, that I reached out again to the investigators, a plea for help, for any shred of new information. But their response, when it came, was not the reassurance I had hoped for. They were still working, they said, still trying to find a way to deal with the doll, but the undercurrent of their message was clear. I was on my own. Alone with the weight of the unknown pressing in, I realized the depth of my plight. This was no longer just about a doll, a haunted object from a forgotten past. This was about survival, about the battle for my own sanity in the face of an unseen adversary. The haunting had escalated, not into specters or visible threats, but into a persistent, gnawing terror that pervaded every moment of my existence. It's funny, isn't it? How quickly our definition of normal can shift. There I was, a grown adult, jumping at shadows and flinching at the wind. But it wasn't just fear. No, it was more than that. It was the feeling of being hunted, of being prey in my own home, a place that should have been my sanctuary. In those days following the investigators' inconclusive visit, my life became a series of coping mechanisms. I stopped sleeping at night, the hours when the world quieted down becoming my most dreaded. The darkness wasn't just absence of light anymore. It was a canvas for my fears, for the palpable sense of something waiting just beyond my sight. I tried everything. Lights on all night, TV blaring, friends over whenever they could stand to be in the increasingly oppressive atmosphere of my home. But nothing helped. Friends started to decline my invitations, their excuses thinly veiling their unease. They felt it too, the oppressive air, the sense that something was deeply wrong. Desperate for some semblance of peace, I turned to research, to history and science, looking for anything that could explain or combat the dread that had taken over my life. I learned about the history of haunted objects, about attachments and spirits, about the theories of energy and presence, but knowledge without power is its own kind of hell. I understood more, feared more, but could do no less. It was during one of these deep, frenetic research sessions that I stumbled upon a concept that chilled me to the bone, the idea that some entities don't just haunt places. They haunt people. They attach, not to bricks or wood, but to flesh and blood. A cold realization washed over me, a tide of horror and understanding. The doll had been a vessel, yes, but not the source. I was the source. The nights grew longer, each one a marathon of dread and waiting. I started seeing things, fleeting glimpses of something just out of the corner of my eye, a shadow where there should have been light, a figure where there should have been emptiness. I told myself it was the stress, the lack of sleep, but the seed of terror had taken root. In my heart, I knew I couldn't go on like this. The entity, whatever it was, had woven itself into the fabric of my life, turning every moment into a waking nightmare. I was losing myself, piece by piece, to the haunting. It was then, in my lowest, most desperate moment, that I realized I had to face this head-on. Running wasn't an option. Hiding only fed the darkness. I decided to confront whatever haunted me, to reclaim my life or lose it trying. The decision brought a sliver of strength, a faint glimmer of the person I used to be before the doll, before the shadows. I prepared myself mentally and physically for what was to come. The house, once a place of fear, became my battleground. And so, with every light blazing, I waited for night to fall, for the haunting to begin. I didn't know what I would do when faced with the source of my torment. There were no guides for this, no surefire solutions. But I knew I couldn't endure another moment of fear, another second of being a victim in my own home. As the clock ticked closer to the witching hour, the time when the night held its breath and the world seemed to pause, I could feel it. The shift in the air, the drop in temperature, the electric charge of unseen eyes upon me. It was coming. The culmination of weeks of terror, of a lifetime's worth of nightmares. And I was ready, or as ready as one could be, to face the darkness, to confront the thing that lurked in my own shadows. But nothing, not all the stories or movies or whispered warnings, could have prepared me for what was to come. I stood there in the center of my living room, the once comforting space now transformed into a chilling arena. The echoes of my heartbeats filled the silence, each thump a drum roll to an unknown end. The air was thick, almost tangible, as if I could reach out and touch the very essence of my fear. It was more than anticipation. It was the prelude to a confrontation I felt in my bones but could scarcely comprehend. The night crept forward, each second a painstaking crawl towards inevitability. I could feel it, the encroaching presence, a darkness deeper than the absence of light, seeping through the cracks of my perceived reality. It was as though the very air around me whispered secrets in a language born of nightmares. I tried to steady my breath, to calm the tempest of my thoughts. I had faced many things in my life, hurdles and heartaches, but nothing like this. This was beyond the physical, beyond the mental. This was a battle for my very soul. The clock struck 3, a chime that resonated through the silent house like a herald of doom. And then it began. The temperature dropped, a cold so profound it seemed to leach the warmth from my bones. My breath misted in the air, a ghostly echo of life in the midst of so much darkness. Then, the whispers started, soft at first like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze, but they grew, gaining substance and form until they were words, intelligible and yet not, a language of despair and darkness. I spun around trying to catch the source, but there was nothing, no one, just the oppressive darkness and the chilling whispers. I wanted to scream, to run, but I stood my ground. This was my home, my life, and I would not be chased from it by shadows and fears. "What do you want?" I shouted into the darkness, my voice stronger than I felt. The question hung in the air, unanswered, the whispers falling silent. It was then, in the heart of that silence, that I saw it. The doll. But not as I had seen it before. It was different, changed. Its eyes, once dull and lifeless, burned with a red glow, like the very fires of hell were contained within, and in its tiny porcelain hand it held a knife, an absurdity that was somehow the most terrifying detail of all. My blood turned to ice. The whispers returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from the doll itself. "My turn to kill," they seemed to say, a phrase that repeated over and over, a mantra of madness and malice. I don't know where the courage came from, perhaps from the primal part of the human spirit that refuses to be quenched even in the direst of circumstances. I moved, not away from the threat, but towards it. If I was to face this nightmare, I would do it head on. But as I approached, the room seemed to warp, the laws of reality bending in the presence of the doll. It was a trick of the light, of the shadows, or perhaps of my own fraying sanity. But then, everything stopped. The whispers, the cold, the oppressive dread. It all just ceased. I was alone, truly alone. The doll, the knife, the red eyes, all gone. Had it been a hallucination? A manifestation of my deepest fears? I couldn't tell. The relief was palpable, but so was the confusion, the sense of profound loss. Days passed, then weeks. The normalcy of life attempted to return, but something within me had shifted, irrevocably altered by the events of that night. I was out of the hospital now, the questions of the doctors and the police left unanswered. What could I say? That a doll haunted me? That it wielded a knife and spoke of killing? I moved away, started anew in a place where the shadows held no whispers, where the night was just the night. But the story doesn't end there, because stories like these never truly end. I share this now, not to terrify or to warn, but to unburden, to let others know that sometimes the darkness we face is more than metaphorical. But remember this, if nothing else, we are never truly powerless. Even in the deepest night, in the most consuming darkness, there is always a choice. To fight, to stand, to face our fears, or to let them consume us. I chose to fight. What will you choose?